Mainstream media. Mobile phone service provider Safaricom PLC has recorded a whopping 37 billion Kenya shillings in net profits. This marks a 12% increase in profit after tax at a time Kenyans have been saddled with a high cost of living. But the numbers don't just stop here. So the telco's flagship products, M-Pesa and Fuliza, rate in the highest revenue for the company. So let's get more on the same. Every hour, Safaricom is advancing 56 million Kenya shillings on its fuliza platform. This translates to about 1.34 billion Kenya shillings per day. This emerged as the telecommunications firm reported its half-year results, which stood at a whopping 37 billion Kenya shillings. And as Safaricom is basking in profits after Kenyans' appetite for soft loans skyrocketed amid tough economic times, the overdraft service is one to watch. According to the firm's latest trading results, Kenyans borrowed 1.34 billion Kenya shillings daily through Safaricom's fuliza service. Let's break it down further. So between April and September alone, Safaricom gained 700,000 new fuliza users. Now the service has 1.7 million active users. Total value of disbursements via the service, popularly called fuliza, hit 242.6 billion Kenya shillings in just 6 months, up from 149.4 billion shillings that had been disbursed in a similar period last year. This symbolized 62.4% rise compared to the same time last year. Safaricom introduced fuliza service in 2019 and has become popular among Kenyans in meeting essential needs such as shopping, rent, and supporting friends and family when there is no sufficient money in their M-Pesa wallets. The telco says the average ticket size is at 375.80 shillings. But the borrowing per individual could be higher since customers are allowed to take several overdrafts before repaying, subject to the approved overdraw limit. The increased fuliza overdrafts earned Safaricom 2.8 billion Kenya shillings as revenue, being 32.2% more than the 2.1 billion Kenya shillings earned in the preceding similar period. Safaricom charges fuliza customer a one-off 1.03% interest and a daily administrative fee that depends on the outstanding balance. The fuliza fee starts from 2 shillings per day for 100 shillings overdraft and goes up to 30 shillings per day for 2,500 shillings and above. Safaricom disclosures show that fuliza had a repayment rate of 99% during the review period, meaning that 240.2 billion Kenya shillings of the 242.6 billion shillings was still unpaid. And while fuliza steals the show as Safaricom's cash cow, its predecessor M-Shwari is slowly losing ground among customers. M-Shwari loans dipped by 8.6% to 43.4 billion, while users shrank by 900,000. The average loans on M-Shwari was 6,047 shillings in the same period. Safaricom earned 900 million shillings from M-Shwari. And as the giant telco continues to mint profits, it's optimistic over its intended plans to venture into Ethiopia.
At the time, we hadn't won the telecommunication license in Ethiopia. The outlook of the economy has improved with Kenya staging partial recovery from a depressed performance last year. In view of this and expansion to Ethiopia, we expect earning before interest and tax, as you can see on the screen, in financial year 2022 to be in the range of 97 to 100 billion, and capex, which is capital expenditure, to be in the range of Kenya shillings 70 to 73 billion, inclusive of Ethiopia.
The firm is keen to spend around 200 billion Kenya shillings to kickstart its operations in Ethiopia. Brian George Otieno, KTN News, Nairobi. Very well then. So that story right there sets the pace for our conversation with my colleague Patrick Alushula, who is a writer here at the Standard newspaper. He's the one who wrote you that story on page 5 of today's Standard newspaper. Alushula, good to see you. These are quite telling figures right here. 1.34 billion borrowed on a daily basis through fuliza, and of course 700,000 new users of the service. What is driving these kind of numbers? What is driving this phenomenon?
Quite a telling figure there, Brian, and clearly, as you put it, when you see that in just 6 months we've had 700 additional borrowers joining the league of people who are seeking these loans, it speaks partly on the story of the structure of our economy, that people want things that can help them just to survive for a day, and they have found the answer in such loans. So fuliza has become one of the avenues through which people can borrow and meet their short-term needs. So people want to borrow and repay other loans that they have taken. People want to meet other short-term needs like rent and food, are finding this as a solution. But hidden in this is also the story about economic hardships. We know that this is perhaps the fastest jump we've seen in the story of fuliza since it premiered in 2019. And it just confirms that there are people struggling, and they have found fuliza to be among the measures they can do to ensure that life moves on.
Let's look at those numbers again. 700,000 new users. We're talking about almost 3 or 4 constituencies, if you were to put it in the political context. And we'll juxtapose it with the M-Shwari numbers, which reduced up to 900,000 last year because of the entrance of fuliza. So let's just break it down a little bit. Which demographic is borrowing more? Is it men? Is it women? Between what ages are people borrowing more?
Perhaps to try and explain which demographics are taking most of these loans is to try and understand how are these loans disbursed. So you discover that rightly so, most of these loans tend to be digital loans, and you find that the people, in our environment, the people who are likely to possess tools that are able to access these loans quickly happen to be the population, the younger population, those with smartphones. And the people who are lending them have ensured that they make the process as seamless as possible. So you wake up in the morning and all you see are messages, people telling you that if you want this loan, in fact, it can be disbursed instantly. And so we have a youthful population that has gone ahead and installed a number of applications in their phone. So you discover that there are people who have reached a stage where they are now able to borrow from a particular digital lender to repay another digital lender, and the cycle goes on.
Great. So, I mean, let's face it, we have been in a tough economic period occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic. But some of the discoveries we are making is that borrowing in itself is not a bad thing. But then why should people borrow from an advisory point of view, Alushula?
Interesting. People will argue that borrowing is not a bad thing. And you've seen Kenyans out there crying about our public debt, and the cry has been about how are we using the money that we are borrowing. Because on the same day we reported this jump on the digital loans jumping, we also recorded an increased activity for those who have been caught in the gambling craze. So
sure.
It could be a possibility that while people are borrowing as a good thing, one thing we need to ask ourselves as a country is, yes, we've made strides, and the strides we've made in the area of financial inclusion seems to be a nice story. I think at 2018 we were talking of 83%, and one of the key drivers was around digital, the digital era, in the period where we've seen a lot of people turn to mobile phones. So in terms of financial inclusion, that is a beautiful story to tell. But what about the story about financial literacy? So for as long as there are miles apart, then we can as well say that this is an unhealthy financial inclusion, a case where borrowing has become like a fad. Everybody wakes up and they think, for as long as I've been told these loans are accessible, let me go for one. And look at the nature of activities that people are borrowing for. So if you are borrowing for consumption, it means that the temptation to be forever on be tied in the web of borrowing and borrowing, because you are involved in activities that are not able to generate another income. Yes, we may argue that there are those who have benefited from this wave, where you find people involved in small businesses that just require day-to-day activities, let's say for mama mbogas.
Sure.
And some reports have shown before that they borrow as early as 3 a.m. and by 6 p.m.
They've paid back.
They have paid back.
Which is an amazing thing, Alishula. Great. So you've mentioned about gambling, and you sort of cast aspersions on that kind of financial inclusion. Of course, we are coming, once again, we're coming from a very tough time economically, and some people resorted to sports betting, online gambling and the like, and the figures that were reported were that 83 billion was gambled between that same period of time. Is gambling a job? And if it is not, or if it is, how then should somebody engage responsibly in it?
Well, those who are gambling will tell you that this is just another version of people who are putting their money on the stock market. And an interesting thing, when you talk to the people who put money on the stock market and those who gamble, they sort of fail to even see the difference between the two.
Okay.
But gambling is obviously a zero-sum game. So one person winning and being paraded in the eyes of the public may make more people believe that indeed they are going to make a lot of money from this vice. But when you look at it, if you are going to borrow, then you lose the bet that you've made, then what becomes of your future then, if not to go and borrow from another digital lender to try and repay what you borrowed? So you'll forever be tied in a wave of borrowing. I believe a good debt should be the one that can be able to generate a return, so that in future, either you are debt-free or you are able to keep yourself within a sustainable level of borrowing.
Great. You have sort of preempted my next question, which is going also to be the last question as we wrap up the conversation. What then should inform a proper debt management strategy, even at local level, at a personal level? Because we are loud about the country's debt situation, but ourselves, we are also ailing. So what should inform a proper debt management strategy?
On the policy level, first of all, if I was to begin with that, then it means that there needs to be a lot of intervention measures to try and bridge the gap between financial inclusion and financial literacy. Because if we have a population which has been given so many options to borrow, and everybody seems to be asking another to borrow, then it means if we are not able to bridge that gap, it's obviously going to be a problem. So on that front, it means people like those in government, the regulators, ought to come in strongly. Then number two, on a personal level, people say that once you start borrowing, if you are not careful, that starts to be your new way of life. So it means people trying to seek financial advisors. And by the way, some people who put, for example, their money in gambling, all they are chasing after are high returns. So if such people can be able to access the services of financial planners or even investors, then they can be advised properly on the best way to channel their resources.
Great. Many thanks, Patrick Alishula, for joining us to just cross the I's and dot the T's on this one. We are grateful for your time. We now want to take a short break. We'll be back with more. Don't go too far.